What makes a video game sequel good? Should it remain faithful to the original, like Super Mario Bros. 2, essentially being more of the exact same game? Should a sequel make large across-the-board changes, like Super Mario USA? Or should it be somewhere in between, like Spark the Electric Jester 3, Jak 2, or Ripto's Rage? Of course, even within these different categories of sequels, the quality can drastically vary, with games ranging from incredible to absolutely horrendous. In the middle of all of that lies the game we're talking about today, Super Monkey Ball 2. In many ways, Super Monkey Ball 2 is close enough to its predecessor that it may as well be a ROM hack, and in others, it's a completely different beast. At its best, Super Monkey Ball 2 represents some of the best platforming design of any game ever made, unquestionably better than the first game, and at its worst, it's a complete piece of crap. Today, let's take a minute to talk about Super Monkey Ball 2. In terms of core gameplay, Super Monkey Ball 2 is more or less the same as the first title. The main gameplay still consists of tilting the stages with the left analog stick and rolling the ball through the levels. You still collect bananas and complete stages by breaking the goal tape whilst racing against the time limit. The controls feel mostly the same, although the movement is a little tighter, while in Super Monkey Ball 1 it could feel a little slippery at points. In addition, the camera is more zoomed in, leaving the monkeys closer to the bottom of the screen rather than in the middle. The change seemed weird when I first played the game, but it allows you to better see what's ahead of you, and having less view of what's behind you rarely causes any issues, so I find the change to be an improvement on the whole. Aside from that, the core gameplay is nigh identical to the first game, which is fine by me. It was already nearly perfect the first time anyways. The main gameplay changes here are level-specific additions, such as switches that control the speed and movement of the level, warp gates that teleport the monkeys around the stages, and seesaws that tilt under the monkey's weight. Conceptually, all these are great additions. How well are they used in the game itself? Let's circle back to that later. For now, we'll move on to the presentation. Visually, Super Monkey Ball 2 is very much a continuation of its predecessor's visual style, only significantly improved. It's worth noting that in the elongated time period between this video and my review of the first game, I was able to acquire all of the necessary hardware to record from a real GameCube. So, while my original review featured emulated footage at a higher resolution, this time both games are running with the fidelity and performance they were made for. On that note, Super Monkey Ball 2 deserves major credit for natively supporting both progressive scan and widescreen. This was far from standard in 2002, and it leaves Super Monkey Ball 2, technically speaking, far ahead of the first game, which supported neither of these. Comparing footage of 2 to 1, 2 looks razor sharp even today, while 1 looks significantly less defined, because of its lack of progressive scan. Widescreen is also a big win for 2, but it's worth noting that 2's widescreen does crop the vertical view somewhat, in addition to increasing the horizontal FOV. I think the trade-off is worth it, but I totally understand if someone preferred the uncropped 4 to 3. In terms of the graphics themselves, Super Monkey Ball 2 is still way ahead of the first game. Character models look mostly the same, but the character animations are far more polished and satisfying, and unlike the first game, there was never any point where they look off-putting in 2. The level geometry is about the same as the first game, while the level textures have more detail than before. The environments have to be the biggest improvement over the original, as they all feature relatively high poly geometry, decent if a bit pixelated texture work, and even some nice visual effects, such as the volcano's heat or the bonus stage's reflections. The 2D elements have also been dramatically improved, with the HUD being completely replaced with a much more polished one, and the menus being reworked to look far more professionally done. Unfortunately, despite all of the positives, there are still 2 areas that I find the first game to surpass the sequel visually. First, the use of visual effects isn't quite as striking this time around. Sure, the game still features reflections and heat effects like the first game, but the first game's versions of these are more detailed and more convincing on the whole. The second problem with 2's visuals is that, while it is a massive technical and stylistic improvement in most ways, this ultimately came at the cost of some minor performance problems. They rarely affect gameplay, mind you, but they also aren't hard to find at all if you're paying attention, and they do detract from the game's otherwise polished nature when they crop up. Otherwise, Super Monkey Ball 2 is a fantastic looking game, easily better than the first one. It's also worth taking a second to give credit to the game's fantastic sound design. The sound effects in 2 are simply perfect, kinetic and impactful in a way that no other game in the series, or really any platformers at all, are. From the announcer's exaggerated voice to slamming into walls, The sound design makes everything feel so much better than it otherwise would. The music in Super Monkey Ball 2 is also a sizable improvement over the first game. Super Monkey Ball 1's music was alright, but it didn't really stand out much. It was just kind of there, basically. On the other hand, Super Monkey Ball 2 has some standout tracks to its name. It's still not my favorite music ever or anything, but it is nevertheless a huge improvement over the first game. Alright, with all the basics covered, there's no better time to get into the content of this game. Super Monkey Ball 1's main game consisted mainly of just one mode, where you pick a difficulty and attempt to beat all of the stages without losing all your lives. Super Monkey Ball 2 still includes this mode, now called Challenge Mode, along with a brand new Story Mode. Let's just get Story Mode out of the way real quick. You pick one of the 10 available levels in each world to play, and once you beat them all, you move on to the next world. After beating each world, a story cutscene plays that details the protagonist's journey to stop Dr. Bad-Boon from stealing all of the bananas from the monkey village. Each world tends to leave the monkeys with a unique scenario in the story, but the story on the whole is really basic and honestly pretty unnecessary. In fact, the story mode in general feels unneeded. The mode doesn't have lives, meaning that you have infinite tries on every level, which removes all sense of challenge from the game. Combine that with the short length of Monkey Ball levels, meaning that a large chunk of the story mode is spent in loading screens and on auto-saving, and you have one seriously boring mode on your hands. Okay, well, story mode kinda sucks, but what we're really here for anyway is the challenge mode. Just like the first game, you start with 3 lives, you earn more by collecting 100 bananas, and the amount of stages you play through depends on the difficulty you select. If you run out of lives, you can use one of the 5 continues to continue playing, at the cost of being able to reach each difficulty's extra stages. On the surface, it's the same as the first game, until you dig just a little bit deeper, in which case 2's challenge mode falls apart quickly. See, in both games, you earn play points for playing the main modes, which can then be spent to unlock the minigames and a few other things. Well, in the first game, one of those things is extra continues to add to the original 5. Eventually, you would buy the 10th continue, and then unlock unlimited continues to use. While having unlimited continues would allow you to simply brute force every level, you still had to make those 3 lives count if you wanted to access Expert Extra and beyond. In 2, you can no longer buy continues, instead just buying extra lives to start with. There are immediately a few big problems here. First, for a newer player, or if you have to make a new save file, like I did, you are at an objective disadvantage against a player who has a complete save. A bit annoying, but small potatoes really. No, the bigger problem here is that extra lives make it significantly easier to reach the higher difficulties now that you have far more liberty to fail levels over and over again without consequence. Now you can't unlock infinite lives at least, but practically speaking, 99 lives really isn't any better. There is a Master Extra to reach now, leaving a full expert playthrough at 80 levels, which may sound like it would balance the new lives count out a little compared to the 70 level marathon in 1, however, it isn't really an 80 level marathon. Both games feature extra goals in certain stages, allowing you to skip levels in challenge mode if you can reach them. However, in the Expert through Master run in the first game, there were only a few skip goals, and only an expert itself. In 2's Expert through Master Extra run, there are far more skip goals across all 4 difficulty tiers. And even if you only take some of them, that still leaves you playing an amount of stages far below 80. These differences leave challenge mode in 2, at least once you've unlocked all the lives, feeling mindless and like a pushover in comparison to the sharp challenge of that first game. Up to now, I haven't said much about the level design of Super Monkey Ball 2, despite how big of a part of these games it is. In my review of the first game last 20 months ago, I made the case that Super Monkey Ball was the best game in the entire series, and one of the best platformers ever for that matter, almost entirely because the level design was so strong. Nearly every stage had its own challenge or purpose, like objects that move with the stage tilt, platforms that rotate back and forth, checkerboarded flooring that you have to cross by the corners, floors that bend, move in and out, etc., etc. The consistency was even more impressive than the creativity, as there was really only one bad level amongst the lot, Master 8. Everything else felt polished and purposeful, which is a major part in why the game is so much fun to go back to, even 23 years after launch. What about Super Monkey Ball 2 then? Well, it's a mess. How exactly? Let's just get into it. In terms of level quality, Super Monkey Ball 2 is perhaps one of the most hit-and-miss games I've ever played. Comparing the number of good to bad levels, it's not quite 50-50, but man, it rides close to that line at points. On the positive side, when levels in Super Monkey Ball 2 are good, they're often extraordinary. The designers clearly didn't exhaust all their creativity on the first game, and it shows through many of the levels in this game. Coaster, Gravity Slider, Totalitarianism, Reversible Gear, Toggle, 8 Bracelets, Charge, Conical Slider, I could keep going. But the point is that when Super Monkey Ball 2 is at its strongest, it can surpass just about any other platformer, Super Monkey Ball 1 included. Compared to the compact level design of the first game, Super Monkey Ball 2's levels contain much more extravagance and excitement than the first game, which can be really fun in some cases. Many of these new levels make clever use of the new stage elements, such as how Conical Slider sees the player rolling down a massive spiral hill at great speeds, only to take all of that speed through a teleporter back to the top where you need to make an otherwise impossible jump. There's also Punch Seesaws, which requires you to master the seesaw mechanic as you weave around massive holes on platforms that will dump you off into the void if you're not careful. Even the switches have some time to shine on Soft Cream, where you navigate what is essentially a swirl of ice cream as you pick the speed and direction of the level that best facilitates your climb to the top. All that's not to say that there aren't good levels that don't rely on the new gimmicks, however. Notch combines skilled movement with a nice puzzle element of watching the stage to decide the best time to make the trek up, and on the whole, it really is one of my favorite stages in all of Monkey Ball. Cross Floors is also a fun movement stage, despite its simplicity, while Helix and GameCube from Master Extra serve as two great and seriously difficult levels to send out the game on. All of that sounds great, you say. What could be the problem then? Well, all of that is great, but to only focus on those good parts is to ignore a huge chunk of the game. For simplicity's sake, we can fairly easily categorize most of the game's bad levels under two categories, those being too easy and absolutely infuriating. Starting with the former category, we should probably start with the first stage, in Beginner. Well, actually the second stage as well, the third too, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, you know what? Let's just make this simpler. Beginner sucks. Throw in Beginner Extra as well. Nearly every level here lacks anything interesting in terms of gameplay. Even when you aren't just moving forward and a bit side to side, which is what many of these levels come down to, you are left with ineffective hazards and unnecessarily long levels that don't serve to teach the player much of anything about the game itself. Linear Seesaws is the exception, as it is a decent introduction to the seesaws, and I guess the jump for the secret goal and switches is kinda cool as well. I'm really stretching here though. Okay, so what if the beginner levels are too easy? They're supposed to be easy. Well, to that, I'd point out that Beginner in the first game was still plenty enjoyable, while still being perfectly accessible to new players, but fine. Beginner is supposed to be easy. Maybe that will make it boring to some. However, what excuse does Swing Bridges, a level in Master, possibly have? You can effortlessly skip the whole thing simply by moving forward and shifting left and right slightly. That's it! In fact, Master 1, Centrifugal, isn't much better. Figuring out how to use momentum to ride up the walls is a bit tricky on the first go, I guess, but once you understand that, there's no challenge here. It's certainly not Master material. What about Striker from Master Extra? Not only is this by no means a Master level, I think it is among the easiest levels in the whole game. Aligning with the launcher is extremely simple, and the landing platforms are so big that you'd have to try to miss them. Now that's just a few examples, but I think you get the point. Now, if overly easy levels and high difficulties was the biggest level design issue in this game, then that might not be such a big deal. At least it doesn't impede your progress, right? However, Super Monkey Ball 2 is packed with levels that feel like they were designed specifically to be run killers, and it is absolutely enraging. Just take Arthropod for example. To be honest, I don't think that this level is really that bad. Or at least it wouldn't be if it was placed where it belongs. In Master or Master Extra, I'd argue it's one of the hardest levels in the whole game, and yet here it is, at the end of Advanced. I have no idea how they expect a player to beat this level if they are at the intermediate level of play that Advanced is supposed to be built for. Then what about the levels that will kill your runs despite not being any good at all, no matter the difficulty? Switch Inferno seems to have a reputation as one of the worst levels in the game, and it's easy to see why. There's no indication of what switch to press here, meaning that you'll just have to guess which of the 56 switches will open the goal. At least there are 4 different switches that open it, but the other 52 will kill you, so good luck with that. Variable Width is the level to introduce Master Extra, and it's awful. Seriously, what are you supposed to do here? Even in all of my time playing this game, I've yet to develop a real strategy in this stage, and rather I just brute force it. Melting Pot is just annoying, as I rarely feel like I have complete control of what's going on. No matter what I do, there always seems to be an element of luck here. Oh, and speaking of luck-based feeling stages, what about Dizzy System, near the end of Master Extra? This level is seriously annoying, and it feels like it rarely ever works. And then, of course, there's sliced cheese. No. Nope. No, absolutely not. Can't be bothered. Nope. Look, none of these levels on their own would be a significant blemish on this game. After all, Super Monkey Ball 1 had Master 8, which was terrible, and yet, I still find that game to be one of the only games I've ever played to even approach perfection. However, Super Monkey Ball 2 simply has so many levels that are either too boring and easy, or too random and frustrating, and it is honestly impossible to ignore. And what I've talked about thus far doesn't even account for the game's other bad stages that don't fit in these categories. For instance, why can triangle holes and quick turn be beaten simply by holding forward? Why does air hockey exist at all? And what even is the developer intended path on Train Worm? I could keep going, but I think the point has been made by now. Truth be told, Super Monkey Ball 2 can often be an exhausting game to play because of all of this, and by the time I complete an Expert through Master Extra run, I just want it to end, a feeling the first game never gives me. On that note, we might as well address the side content before we wrap up. Just like last time, the challenge mode has 4-player take-turns multiplayer, which can be quite a lot of fun to play with a friend or in a party setting. Weirdly though, the simultaneous competition mode has been axed since the first title. It was rather undeveloped then, but I'd rather have seen it fleshed out than removed completely. I wouldn't say it's a huge deal though, since the main multiplayer mode in all of these games is always the party games. And Super Monkey Ball 2 returns with 6 new party games in addition to the original 6 from Game 1. The 6 returning minigames aren't simple reused content, however, as they have been kind of remade for this sequel. I made it clear last time that I really don't care much about the minigames, but in 2, I do quite enjoy split-screen Monkey Target, and the upgrades to Billiards are welcome. In addition, Monkey Fight is actually really fast-paced and pretty fun now. Other than that, the minigames are not only still rather mediocre to me, but may actually be worse than the first game. Monkey Race and Bowling have been expanded, but they still have sloppy controls and really aren't much fun. Monkey Golf has been butchered, losing its well-crafted mini-golf courses in exchange for boring regular golf stages. The new minigames could have been enough to mitigate the hit-and-miss element of these remade minigames, but the new ones are somehow far more shallow. Monkey Soccer, Tennis, and Dogfight are about what you'd expect and nothing more. Monkey Shot is just a light gun game that you have to play with the analog stick, so that's not really any fun. And Monkey Boat is just another racing mode that somehow plays far worse than Monkey Race. Monkey Baseball is the only decent one of the new minigames, making some interesting changes to the standard game of baseball, using these ramps and holes to give home runs, points, and outs. Overall, the minigames are far from bad or anything, but man, they really aren't anything special to be honest. And that concludes just about everything I have to say about Super Monkey Ball 2. Now, if I haven't made it clear by both what I've said today, and by the amount of time it took me to get around to reviewing this game, I find it to be a mess, which is quite disappointing following up the amazing first title. In so many instances, it simply struggles to maintain a consistent quality standard in its most important aspect, its level design, that it can be difficult to comprehend how anyone prefers this to the polished and nigh perfectly executed first title. The game is rife with gimmicky, easy, or frustrating levels that just shouldn't have been here in the first place. And even for the levels that are good, the level placement and general difficulty balancing are shockingly far off of what they should be. Combine this with the game's weirdly split main game between the story and challenge modes, the poorly thought through revamp to the playpoint system, and the fact that the minigames may actually be worse on the whole, and you have a game that is really difficult to describe as anything other than a mixed bag. And yet, in spite of all of that, I'm still not at all surprised by this game's critical acclaim over the years. To me, it's one of those games where I can understand why it's gotten such great reviews, but I could also perfectly understand why someone would absolutely hate this game. But I do not. In fact, it has a solid place amongst my all-time favorite games. The game feel is just so good, the sound design is phenomenal, the music is catchy and decently memorable, the graphics are gorgeous for the time, the game is technically quite impressive, and when the levels and minigames are good, it really doesn't get much better than this in the world of gaming on the whole. Every time I replay this game, I am keenly aware of its problems as I encounter them. Its many, many problems. And yet, there will likely always be another time that I will replay this game. Maybe, just maybe, that's the dilemma of Super Monkey Ball 2. Anywho, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time I decide to upload, I guess.